ready for our next speaker. And how it's going to work now, things are going to shift just a little bit for the end of our day. And Karen's going to be speaking, giving a presentation on the importance of single-issue campaigns. And then we're going to go straight into an interview with Karen. Because it is United Poultry Concern's 25-year anniversary, we really want to honor that and honor Karen and hear her story. And hear about the amazing work that she's done over this quarter century. So we're going to go straight into an interview. She'll be interviewed by Kim Sturla, which you heard from earlier, and then we'll take a break after that interview. So it's just going to be a little bit of a long session, and then we'll take a break. So I have now had the privilege of working for this amazing woman for over a year. And I can tell you she is one of the hardest working women I have ever encountered. It's amazing, all that she does, all the amazing work that she's doing, writings that she is putting out, and I'm just honestly amazed weekly at how just incredible she is and how much work she does for the animals. She is the president and founder, of course, of United Poultry Concerns. And she is the author of several books, including Prison Chickens, Poisoned Eggs, An Insider Look at the Modern Poultry Industry, and More Than a Meal, A Turkey in History, Myth, Ritual, and Reality. She was award-winningly profiled in the Washington Post for her outstanding work for the birds. And Karen, of course, has a sanctuary in the eastern shore of Virginia where she keeps chickens, and a peacock named Frankincense. And we are just wonderfully honored to have her here. Please welcome a true pioneer in animal rights, Karen Davis.
Can everybody hear me? Great. Well, I'm delighted to be here today. This is our 4th annual Conscious Eating Conference here in Berkeley. And we've just had such a wonderful day today, and it's just such an honor to share this day with you and to share it on behalf of the animals we speak for, and to be gathered together in their name and on their behalf, and on behalf of all of us, as Victoria has just been saying, a better life for all of us, a more rich, rewarding, caring, compassionate, just life. So I will start out by explaining a little bit about my presentation here and why I think that this, talking about single-issue campaigns is a very important thing for us to be thinking about. I think a number of you in the audience are members of the animal rights movement or the animal welfare movement, animal protection movement, and you may have heard that there is a controversy which has mainly been spearheaded by the attorney Gary Francione, which denigrates and castigates single-issue campaigns in animal advocacy. How many of you in this audience are somewhat familiar with this raging controversy? Well, and how many are not? Okay. Well, I will try to explain then to you. When the title of my presentation is Single-Issue Campaigns and Abolition / Vegan Advocacy, what would a chicken say? Now, when I use the term abolition and abolitionists in this presentation, I want everybody to understand that United Poultry Concerns is an abolitionist organization. That is, we work to abolish the use and abuse, which basically are the same thing, of animals in all areas of exploitation. We work to create a world where animals are respected, where their dignity is respected, where they live the kinds of lives that they evolved in nature to live as closely as possible. The video that you saw this morning of chickens in the slaughterhouse and the dairy cows living in manure, animals don't live that way in their natural habitats. You don't go into the forest or the meadows or any place else and experience the odors of animal manure, and you don't come upon mounds and heaps and heaps and heaps of animal feces and all of that. It is only in places that humans construct for animals to live in that these kinds of obscenities occur. And I always argue that when we try to get people to understand what these chickens and turkeys and cows and pigs and goats and fish, of course, and increasingly these factory farm confinements known as aquacultures. In fact, we call fish the new chickens of the sea. The chicken industry having been the model for all industrial animal farming that began in the early 20th century. So I submit that there are many ways in which not only do we need to understand what it would be like for us to be in comparable circumstances, unable ever to escape, living only in, knowing our bodies mainly as a source of excrement and misery of every kind. I think it's important for us to put ourselves in the position of these animals as much as we can. I also think it's important for us to realize that these animals are other species who have never created anything in their own worlds of life that in any way relate to the conditions we are forcing them to live in. And for that reason, I submit that these chickens and other animals are in ways that we can't even imagine suffering even more than we would in these conditions. Because there's nothing in their psyches, there's nothing in their evolution that can possibly make any sense of the conditions that they find themselves in because of us. That their suffering is something that exceeds what we can imagine, even though we must do everything we can to try to imagine what it must be like to be a chicken caught in a filthy warehouse, breathing nothing but the ammonia fumes from their own built-up waste. So when I talk about single-issue campaigns here, first of all, we are abolitionists. So when I use the term abolition and abolitionists in my presentation, I'm going to be referring to a particular, let's say, ultimate example of the abolitionist movement or stance or position, capital A. And that would be the kind that I can't help but name the individual who has basically branded that ultimate form of abolition, Gary Francione, and partly because that branding of the term abolition as a Gary Francione sort of identity logo position has entailed on his part a huge denigration, very verbal, very in-your-face kind of denigration on Facebook and other places of organizations such as United Poultry Concerns and Fish Feel and a whole range of other groups for committing what he and those who follow him consider to be a form of traitorship, a form of betrayal of the ultimate goal of animal rights, abolition, veganism. We have all been denigrated as sellouts, as thwarting and impeding and hindering the worldwide fulfillment of the vegan desire, the vegan life. So what particularly precipitated my writing of this article And now my presentation based on this article, Single Issue Campaigns and Abolition Vegan Advocacy, What Would a Chicken Say? What really precipitated this article that I wrote last year was Gary Francione's denunciation of a campaign of United Poultry Concerns that we've been conducting since 1994 against a practice by some ultra-Orthodox Jewish communities known as corporis, a term which roughly means sacrifice or atonement or substitute or replacement, which basically entails, if you're using chickens, which you don't have to use in the corporis ritual anyway, you don't have to use animals, and for that matter, you don't even have to practice corporis according to the Torah or the Talmud, or it's not part of central Jewish law. But what it involves with chickens is swinging them by their legs or by their wings in Brooklyn, where we've focused our energies and our attention. Grabbing by their wings and swinging them around their heads and reciting a chant about this chicken basically takes on my sins of the previous year so that I may have a long and happy life in the next year. And then the chickens are slaughtered out in the public square, on platforms and on tables. This is an event which takes place outside. It's not like Santeria or like the factory farms. And by the way, our organization in Virginia is located in one of the largest chicken producing areas in the country, known as the Delmarva Peninsula, comprising all of Delaware, which is considers itself the birthplace of the broiler chicken industry, the broiler chickens being the meat-type chickens, the 9 out of 10 billion land animals. So the Delmarva Peninsula, comprising all of Delaware, the eastern shore of Virginia, the eastern shore of Maryland. So these chickens are trucked from possibly New Jersey, possibly Delaware. These broiler chickens, these heavy white young chickens, are trucked up to Brooklyn, the Bronx, etc. This also takes place in Los Angeles, in certain enclaves in Los Angeles, in Jerusalem, and various other places where these particular communities are located. They sit out on the street for days, piled high in transport crates. These birds are so tightly put into these transport crates, they can't move. They're getting no food and no water. They're sitting out there in the filthy streets of Brooklyn. They are, meanwhile, defecating as much as they can after having no food for a while. That stops, and that's one of the reasons why they're deprived of food, so that when they're being swung around, they don't defecate all over the practitioners. So they're sitting there starving. They're sitting there dehydrating, which is the most horrible experience. And they can't move their limbs, which we all know how it feels just to want to get out of an airplane, like I felt 2 days ago after 6 hours of flying. You just can hardly stand sitting there anymore in your seat. But imagine making that be where you live. Well, okay. So these birds are out there. They're stacked, like you'll have maybe 10 crates. And imagine being the chicken who is in the middle there somewhere, just like in the battery cages in the egg industry. It was really people in Brooklyn who contacted United Poultry Concerns back in 1994, mainly Jewish residents who contacted us, desperately upset about seeing these chickens being neglected, crying, being deprived of food or water. Plus, they're out there in the elements, so it rains, there's no protection, they're just treated like trash, like nothing. So the question is, what do you do? This is a sort of emblematic example that I'm giving here of a single issue campaign that is one of many campaigns of United Poultry Concerns. We do many campaigns. This is one of them. And in June of 2010, at the Mercy for Animals office in Manhattan, I and a group of about 8 other people, New Yorkers, officially founded what we finally ended up, after a lot of bickering and email back and forth about what the title was going to be, the Alliance to End Chickens as Kaporas. And this is a very vigorous campaign. We're now moving into a litigation phase, and I'm not going to certainly take up time describing all of this, but you can find it all on our website. But this particular campaign of ours was the kind of campaign that really got Gary Francione and the abolitionist, capital A, attention, so that we began to be attacked repeatedly on his Facebook page for as anti-Semites and focusing only on these chickens, and what about all the chickens who are in all the factory farms and slaughterhouses, et cetera, et cetera. Well, and I just want to give you a couple of pictures so you get an idea of what this Brooklyn scene, for example, where we are year after year standing out there protesting, while all these chickens are out there crying, their children, babies in strollers. It's just a mayhem. It's like a carnivalesque hell. And it's right there on the city streets. So, of course, my question is, what do? Do you just step over those chickens and go on and tell everybody there to go vegan? Is that what you do? Just ignore the chickens and tell everybody to go vegan, or what? Okay. So I'll skip this right now, but this just describes the Alliance. Alliance's mission. But these are some of the things that we particularly draw attention to, that these chickens are being held for days in transport crates. They're suspended, held by their wings, which is agony for a chicken. Chickens aren't intended for their body weight to be held by their wings. It's very painful, it's horrible, breaks their wings, all kinds of things. Being exposed to the Kaporas environment, which, as I said, it's just a carnivalesque mayhem, screaming, yelling, everything going on, dirt, blood, you name it, being slaughtered out there in the public domain, and then being abandoned after the ceremony, just left there, writhing on the ground, cut throats, just left, thrown dead and alive into plastic garbage bags. All of that. That's what this event is. So there's just one example of the chickens in the crates sitting right out on the city street, and they're going to be out there for days. Right there. And then I get to this chicken, because every one of those is a chicken just like her. It's trapped in this incredible, again, words fail really, you know. There's no words for it. We can't even imagine. So we had a law conference. The New York City Animal Law Committee put on a conference last June, and I, of course, gave my presentation, which I'm just showing you a few slides here. And Gary Francione was invited to speak about the constitutional issues involving animal sacrifice. But instead, he took his time to ignore what he was invited to speak about, the constitutionality of animal sacrifice and the state laws versus the Supreme Court decision and all of that, and basically just lambasted the whole campaign. He said he didn't, it's too bad how they're treated, but we should all be out there just, basically ignoring these chickens and telling everybody to go vegan. So I also draw your attention to the fact that our organization, United Poultry Concerns, can be called, in a certain sense, a single type of animal organization. We focus on domestic fowl, that is, those birds who have the misfortune to be considered a food source by and for human beings. Chickens, turkeys, guinea fowl, certain types of pheasants, pigeons. But of course, since chickens are 9 out of 10 land animals being raised and slaughtered for food in the United States, that doesn't even count the egg-laying hens. The largest number of animals being raised and slaughtered for food, and who you mainly saw in the slaughter scenes that were shown this morning by TJ, those were broiler chickens. Those were the meat-type chickens. Those are the ones who are being slaughtered all the time down where we're located. So that's who they are. So we're, considered like we could consider ourselves a single-issue organization focusing on a certain class of animals, the so-called domesticated fowl, particularly chickens, and then turkeys and ducks also. The question is whether, for example, our focus on chickens, and by extension domestic fowl, all domestic fowl, in our programs and all of the advocacy work that we do, precludes us from being an effective animal advocacy organization on behalf of all animals. Does our focus on chickens prevent veganism from progressing, from being more widely adopted? That's kind of how the issue has been framed, and that's how I'm framing it. Now, one of the points that I make in my article, by the way, you can find it right on our website. You go to our website, there's a category on the left side, Thinking Like a Chicken. And you just click that on, and you'll see many articles that I have written there, and one of them is on single-issue campaigns. So you can just easily read the article and see what all I had to say there that I might not get to here during this presentation. But one of the points I make in my article is, well, let's look at a comparable situation. Let's look at social justice advocacy for human beings. It would seem to me that, arguably, if you're an abolitionist, capital A, and believe that all single issues, all single campaigns on behalf of elephants at the circus, dolphins in SeaWorld, the slaughter of tuna, fish, mountain lion, trophy hunting, you name it. Let's look at something comparable in human justice efforts. It could be argued that, well, the campaign to end apartheid in South Africa was just talking about one particular group of victims. What about all those other people in the world who are being treated just as badly, maybe even worse? Why should we just focus on the treatment of disenfranchised people in South Africa? What about the suffragist movement? I mean, there are just a few women in the United States compared to all the women on the planet who are suffering in many ways worse atrocities in greater numbers than as bad as women certainly were treated before they got the vote. And I mean, women were thrown into prison, they were force-fed, they went through all kinds of horrible stuff, and still do, certainly throughout the world, and we have our issues here. But again, my point is this. It could be argued that just focusing on women's, the mistreatment of women or unjust treatment of women, for example, in the workplace. Well, I mean, isn't that a single issue campaign? It's only just a few women. How can we focus on just a few women when, what about the homeless? And here's an interesting thing. There was just a conference in Los Angeles that Gary Francione and Bob Linden put on together. And I understood from, the grapevine on the internet that one of their, focuses was the plight of the homeless, and having a person speak there about the homeless, and maybe even giving food to some homeless people as part of the conference. I'm not really sure about that. But I thought, well, we're being accused also of being speciesist, by saying, well, we have a different set of standards for non-human animals in our activism on their behalf than we do for humans. Well, isn't it kind of speciesist to say that where it's acceptable to focus on particular examples of human injustice, focusing on particular groups of the victims of injustice, deserve attention, for example, the homeless people, but that particular groups of animals who are being abused should not get special attention? Do we believe that we cannot do both? Now, as you all know now, I started United Poultry Concerns in October of 1990, officially as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. But before that, about 10 years before that, I was a general all-purpose animal rights advocate, and I am an all-purpose animal rights advocate now. But I don't see a conflict between the focused, detailed kind of advocacy that United Poultry Concerns is doing for domestic fowl, and by extension on behalf of a compassionate vegan diet. And any other type of animal advocacy work that I might have been doing. It's a real issue. I feel I can do both, because you can have a particular focus and still have a context that is implied, even as you talk about one particular group of abused animals. You don't, it's not like, well, here's an example of bad single-issue campaigns that we've already heard about today, earlier. This is where you have an animal shelter for dogs and cats, but you serve animals, other animals, as bait to get funding for your dog and cat shelter. Now, that's what I call a closed circle single-issue campaignism. It's where all you care about is these dogs and cats in your shelter, and you don't care about the chickens you're going to have for your fundraiser dinner, or the lobsters, or the cows, or any of them. You're just only for the dogs and cats. I think there's a totally legitimate argument against that type of single-issue campaign, because it's just a closed circle. Now, we, as a sort of single animal campaign, if you want, in organization, and generally speaking, it's our class of animals being domesticated fowl. Even though those animals are our focus, well, we wouldn't serve a lobster at a fundraiser to help chickens. We wouldn't raffle a lambskin coat as a prize to win at a fundraiser for United Poultry Concerns. In other words, our focus is on chickens and turkeys and ducks, but we're not going to punish other animals or use them instrumentally or callously or indifferently and say, well, all we care about is chickens, we don't care about these other animals. In fact, we actually use them as instruments to draw people in to give us money for chickens and turkeys and ducks. We wouldn't do that. But the shelter idea of serving chicken and fish at a fundraiser for dogs and cats, that's exactly what they're doing. And that is a type of single issueism that definitely deserves opprobrium and needs to be challenged and changed. Another example that I remember so well, particularly back in my early days of being involved in the movement and going, for example, in Maryland to some of the legislative sessions where the bills had been introduced by animal advocacy groups that focused on changing the law. And let's say there would be a bill introduced to ban cosmetic testing, or cosmetic testing on rabbits, let's say, something like that. Well, one of the things I saw in these early days of my apprenticeship as a new animal advocate was how the animal lobbyists on behalf of this type of law, like to ban cosmetic testing in the state of Maryland, would seek to ingratiate themselves in the law with the lawmakers by reassuring them that they weren't trying to stop hunting or fishing, or that they tried to bond, used other animal abuses as a way to bond with the lawmaker. And I thought back then, this is horrible. Talk about the issue you're here about. Don't try to reassure them that you're not a wacko. Don't try to reassure them that you're okay with every other type of animal cruelty. It's just this one issue that you want them to vote on. But I saw a lot of that. And if I was really involved in legislation to the extent that I was back then, and anyway, I might see more of that. I hope not, but I might still see some of that. But see, that's the kind of single-issue campaigning and attitude and behavior that deserves criticism. We never want to pit animals against each other. We never want to suggest that some animals are more intelligent than others, some animals are more emotional, or there's just so many ways that we, in a sort of a desperate attempt to elevate the animals we speak for, that we use methods that degrade them by comparing them to 2-year-old children, saying, "No, this animal is so intelligent. He's been found by researchers to be as intelligent as a 2-year-old." No, an adult animal, chicken, or whoever they may be, is much more intelligent than a 2-year-old. A 2-year-old cannot make a society. A 2-year-old does not know how to have parenting skills or all of the forms of neurophysiological development that in any way makes that type of an analogy anything but ridiculous. So this idea of single-issue campaign. Okay, let's say you... now, Gary Francione, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting him, but I hardly think I am, and I've known Gary since he was a lawyer for PETA back in 1983. That's where I first met him. He said recently, or was quoted as saying on the internet, something to the effect that, well, the fact that Ringling Brothers has announced that they are going to retire all their elephant acts, and that is all their elephants, from the circus, effective in 2018. Why not now? This gradualism and things, politics and whatnot, who knows. But okay, 2018, better than never. So Gary basically was quoted as saying something to the effect that, that's fine, but now Ringling Brothers says they're going to be bringing in camels, or maybe some other types of animals. And also that all the energy and time that activists have spent trying to get Ringling Brothers to stop using elephants in their circuses could have been better used by promoting veganism. Yeah, right. That's part of what I'm saying here. I don't see this as an either-or issue. Everything that we do is promoting veganism, and I do want to clarify, as I think others have already done today, that the concept of veganism, I hate isms. I try to find ways to talk that doesn't have ism on the end of it, but the vegan life, it isn't only about your food choices, but you can't be vegan without that being central. As Tolstoy said in an essay that caused me to become vegetarian back in 1974, the first step is to get the suffering of animals out of your system, to get the blood and misery of animals. That's the first step to true social justice living, to truly compassionate living. So, I think that you have to develop the skills to be a good activist. And the only way you can develop those skills is to get out there and do it. To learn the facts, to be knowledgeable, to have the confidence of being knowledgeable when you speak to people. To not just say, oh, well, it's cruel. That's just not enough. You've got to have a little more, substance and detail in your presentation. But you get that as you read and you listen to other activists and you hear and you see the visuals and all of that. But you cannot just, like with the chickens out there on the streets of Brooklyn, I don't think I can just stand out there and ignore those chickens and just pass out vegan literature, go vegan. First of all, to me, this is an example of where you're basically obliterating the animals just the way, in a certain sense, the animal production industry or the laboratory industries do. They obliterate the individual. They're just production units. They're literally visually out of sight. You can't see them unless you're living where we do, where they're going up and down the road in the trucks to the slaughterhouses all day. Of course, people see that. Doesn't necessarily make them go vegan. Some do, but others don't. I mean, people can see all of this. We always hear things like, well, if slaughterhouses had glass walls, everybody would be vegetarian or vegan. I wish that were true. But living where I live, I think it's very complicated. It's very complicated. That's why we have to be strong and really know how to talk to people. But let's say you're out there on behalf of these chickens now, and you're trying to just get people to focus on what's wrong with these chickens being out there stacked up like that for days? Should you just say, well, that's really bad, but chickens, there are like millions of billions of other chickens who are suffering just as much. Here, go vegan, and that just doesn't work. And it's not fair to the animals who are in front of you. You owe them more. You owe them to put attention on them. Okay? Circus elephants. What are you going to do? Are you just going to say, well, yeah, these elephants are being abused, but many more farmed animals are being abused than elephants. That's just like a few animals comparatively. Well, again, I'm going to say this. So are homeless people. They're just a few people compared to all the people in, Ethiopia, all the people who are being tortured, and people don't even realize, again, the processes of production, how things get into the supermarkets and Rite Aid and all the clothing stores. They don't picture all the human beings who are in all these horrible factories and mines and places and living horrible lives, and yet social justice activists for humans focus on particular examples of human abuse without losing sight of the big picture. But should we say, well, I'm not going to deal with just those people in those horrible diamond mines who are treated horribly because we're trying to eliminate all social injustice for all human beings on the planet. So we're not just going to talk about them. We're just going to say, stop abusing every human being. Go vegan. So, do you see what I'm getting at here? We have to develop the ability, the confidence, the savvy to know how to formulate and run, conduct a campaign on behalf of particular individual animal or groups of animals, as well, without ever losing sight of the big picture. Because, as I say in my article, the dimension, the whole, is already in the details. Like, see the universe in a grain of sand, as William Blake's the poet, the English poet, said. And the details are in the dimension. There's the unity and the ubiquity. And they're not separate entities. Or as now Alfred North Whitehead, the philosopher, said, I am in the world is in me. There's an interfusion there. And so I can view that analogy, I can take that analogy and consider and see it as a way of looking at a single issue campaign within the larger context of the campaign to liberate all animals from injustice, indignity, and abuse. I was fascinated when thinking about this whole issue of how we should just skip over the individual examples of misery, which for each individual is not an example, but it's what they're living through, in order to just focus on the big picture. With how the sort of mainstream of environmentalism has taken that very view that we should only care about biosystems and we shouldn't care about individual animals. Over and over again in deep ecology and environmentalism, you hear that individuals don't matter, only saving the species matters. Or even the species don't matter compared to the biosystem. Now, they don't really apply that in most cases to the human race. It's just all the others out there. So again, you're looking at, a sort of a main idea in environmentalism, which is very similar to this main idea in the abolitionist, capital A, view that Gary Francione embodies of individuals don't matter, just the big picture matters. But I don't think most people can picture the big picture without picturing the constituents of the picture. The big picture that way is just like an empty shell. What is it? It doesn't exist without the individuals, the individualities and sub-individualities and everything else that make up the big picture. And again, I think if we think analogously about human justice campaigns, what about the civil rights movement in the 60s? I was very involved in that in the mid-1960s. But even, we could say, well, yeah, but people in South Africa were being treated maybe even worse than the African-American victims of Jim Crow were experiencing. Why just focus on the American issue? Why not focus on, okay, so, okay, it's hard to take on everything here all at once. Then, if you even look at the civil rights movement, it had particular campaigns. The Voting Right, to get the Voting Rights Act. In a campaign for equal opportunity in employment. Many different components of the civil rights movement. Now, why is it that when it comes to our movement on behalf of the members of other species, a different logic is said to be a more effective or more truly what do I say, authentic or pure approach to the effort to try to liberate other animals from again, not only the horrible physical cruelties that we inflict upon them, but the degrading, belittling ways in which we represent them. The ways that we construct them in our minds, in our heads, as inferior and creating sort of an image of these animals that have nothing to do with who they really are, but only about how we want to abuse them with impunity. So, how much time do I have now? 2 minutes? Okay. Thank you. So, see if I missed anything. One thing in particular here that I might have. Well, I think I've kind of pretty much covered the sort of basic issue that I wanted to address here. I've given you the example of where I think, 2 examples of where I think that single-issue campaigns can be justly criticized. But I think I'm going to actually read to you from what Rena Deitch, who I work very closely with. She's a great New York City activist. She's one of these people who has gone into these tents. This is a very patriarchal group of people here who practice before us. The women are definitely considered inferior. But she has gone into these tents where the slaughter is going on with her camcorder, not even a hidden camera, argued with the rabbis and the ritual slaughterers, and she's taped herself, and she's done all these amazing things, and she's gutsy. She's got that chutzpah and that guts that you need to have, along with all of the savvy intelligence and all the wonderful things that make her, and she's so warm-hearted, and she's just so total in her activism for all animals. But she's definitely out there for the chickens. And here's what she said in response to Gary's criticism of the Alliance to End Chickens as Porous, which, as I said, is a project of United Poultry Concerns, but is very open to anybody who wants to join us. She wrote in an email, she said, "While I completely agree that veganism should be promoted, I do not agree that so-called single-issue campaigns and the promotion of veganism are mutually exclusive. In fact," she says, "many people, including myself, became vegan after becoming sensitized to the individual issues. Not all of us can relate to the concept of tens of billions of animals being slaughtered for their flesh or secretions. For many of us, it becomes a reality when we see one animal suffering, and hopefully ultimately being rescued, she says, being saved, it's harder to block out that one face, that one image, than when a sea of animals we can conveniently blur into one blob and tuck away, compartmentalize into our consciousness, into our unconscious mind, ignore and forget. So we're looking at an ethical issue here, an intellectual issue, but we're also talking about how humans think and what moves people. And for many people, it's getting to know a particular animal. How many people have said to me over the years, you know, I never thought about chickens until I read your essay, Feed the Chicken, and it's right up there on our table. And I never thought about a chicken as like having, I don't know, feelings or something. Or I never thought about a chicken. You know, for all animals, but I never thought about a chicken until I visited your sanctuary. Look at Ira Glass of This American Life on PBS. It was visiting our sanctuary and meeting our chickens that caused him to announce on David Letterman a few years ago that he became vegetarian as a result of meeting our chickens. And that followed up on him holding an annual Poultry Slam on his This American Life show every year. And you know, it's meeting actual animals, is getting to know one. In fact, a rabbi last year in Los Angeles said to me, I think it was another email exchange, he said, you know, I'm a total animal rights person, and I hate what the Kapoor's practitioners do to the chickens. He said, but you know, and I mean, he really hates it. He's out there on the street protesting. But he said it was when we were rescuing them, and I felt that chicken in my arms, and I felt her heart beating, and her body, and her fear, and her trembling. He said, you know, it just makes such a difference. Suddenly you know, you just know. And again, I just have to give you one other example. I don't keep meaning to just focus only on the Kapoor situation, but it just has so many lessons in it. When we were doing our animal law panel last June, a rabbi was invited to speak who opposes the use of chickens in Kaporis, because you can swing coins or really anything you want. You don't have to use any animals in the Kaporis ritual. And this rabbi was talking about how, for years, he participated in chicken Kaporis and never really gave it a thought. It was just something he did. That's part of that community. He said, but this time, he said, I started to swing the chicken, and I felt the chicken's fear go through my arm and go through me. And he said, I couldn't do it. So, again, often with many, if not most people, there has to be a way in. And I would say that one of the worst things, however well-meaning we are when we're advocating for animals, is to find ourselves talking so much about capital V veganism and capital A abolition in similar terms, that the animals disappear. They disappear in the big abstractions. The idea that we shouldn't do anything to help any animals who are never going to live to see a vegan world, I think that is such a terrible idea. Anybody who talks about their experience in the concentration camps will talk about how even a burnt-out cigarette, a moldy piece of bread, they were desperate and grateful for compared to nothing. Would we really say that we would deny a pig? We wouldn't even work to give them maybe an opportunity to lie on straw as opposed to cement, because we're just only going to fight for veganism? What about this pig here, for whom the difference between lying on straw and lying on cement is as huge for that pig as it would be for any one of us? Do we really think that pig's experience doesn't matter at all? That pig is not going to live to see a vegan world. Should we just ignore her or him and just step over him in effect or her and say, no, on to the big V, veganism victory. Just something to think about.
Okay, so we're going to just move right into the interview. So hang tight and just like 20 minutes for the interview. Okay.
Hello?
Okay. Okay, so focus again, and we now are going to do the interview. Well, just let Kim take over. All right, go for it, Kim.
Okay, this is my grand idea, because I thought there's very few pioneers like Karen. And United Poultry Concerns has been around now for 25 years. And you pretty much have two old-timers right here. And so I thought it would be great to get a little personal insight into Karen. Now, she has not seen my questions. I'm going to be, and the only thing I ask of Karen, besides her candidness, which I know you all will receive, but the big one is you've got to be succinct.
Succinct.
Because I have a whole slew of questions for you. I want to get through as many as we can.
Okay, let's just say quick.
Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure where to start. Here's one, Karen. If you could pass one law to help chickens, what would it be, understanding that you can't outlaw people eating them?
I would outlaw the breeding of broiler chickens for the bodies that are completely miserable from the inside out, making bigger and bigger and bigger chickens and turkeys, which the agony that they are experiencing as a result of what's happening inside them is the worst agony, along with all the other terrible agonies. So that would be mine. No more breeding for fast, rapid growth.
Okay.
Wait.
I think all of you know that they slaughter the chickens raised for their flesh at 6 weeks of age. You know, unlike those for their eggs.
And they're the size of small turkeys. When they would normally be that big, they're that big.
So, when did you first become, I know the answer to this one. When did you
Well,
first
you want to
become,
answer?
no. When did you first become fascinated with chickens?
I did not grow up around chickens. I had an experience that I actually repressed when I was a child, where a neighbor slaughtered a chicken in his backyard, my best friend's father. I repressed that memory for many, many years, but it obviously had an effect upon my consciousness because one day it came straight into consciousness, full blown. But it was meeting a chicken, actually, a single chicken, at a place that my then husband and I were renting in Maryland. I named her Viva, and as I think I referred to her a few minutes ago in my presentation, and you can read her story on our homepage and out at our table, Viva the chicken hen, the little hen who started it all. She had such a deep effect upon me that meeting her as an individual, I was already vegetarian, I was already vegan, but I had not really known chickens. So meeting Viva, and then being one of the very first interns at Farm Sanctuary in the mid-1980s, when they were still a very tiny enterprise in Avondale, Pennsylvania, and it was the way the chickens would run up to me, and watching them take their sun baths and their dust baths, and just the earthiness of them. And they just touched me so totally. This was all in the mid-1980s. That I, as a lifelong lover of birds, who've always had an affinity for birds, I was just so touched by Viva and by the chickens that I met at Farm Sanctuary, working as an intern, that I decided to start an organization that would focus on them, seeing them within the large context of which I had become aware then of the factory farming industry, in which they represent the largest numbers. So he's the one and the many.
Okay, you hear that, Animal Place interns up there? You're going to be starting your own organization pretty time soon. What is your greatest challenge?
My greatest challenge and the greatest challenge of our organization is getting people to see, to care, and to change. To see what I have come to see about the animals, all animals, and certainly about the birds. To see them with the eyes of perception, of compassion, of fellowship. To get people to see and to care about what they see. To care. But a lot of people will say, I really care, but they stop there. Whereas getting that caring to become so searing, if you wish, so searing, so implanted within them, that they don't just see an image of chickens, for example, suffering horribly like we saw this morning, a maniacal misery that is just beyond anything. But then forgetting when they walk into a restaurant and they smell fried chicken and they're with their friends and they don't want to have to defend their dinner in a situation where everybody's supposed to be congenial. To get people to rise above that, those forces, to become vegan. And the ways of the strategies and the ways that we need to develop, that I need to develop, and in many ways have developed through the years, to reach people, reach into their hearts, get to them to where they never want to go backward. That to me is the biggest challenge.
I would agree with you on that one. Unfortunately, it is an awful big challenge for all of us working in animal rights. What's the one thing that you're the most proud of?
The one thing I'm the most proud of?
Yeah.
I would say that I'm very proud of the fact that against some arguments back in the late 1980s from within our movement, that starting an organization that would focus on chickens would never fly. I was told that. Yeah, you didn't tell me that.
No.
You're off the hook there. I don't even like that. I start thinking about every word you use. But no, there were people in the movement back in the late 1980s when I started fielding opinions about what I was going to do. Now, I wasn't going to be moved by anybody who told me I should start this organization, but I was interested in people's opinions in the movement. And a number of people said, you know, we can't even get people to care about whales. How in the world do you think you're ever going to get an organization to be able to sustain itself that is basically focused on the plight of chickens? How are you going to raise money? How are you going to get people to care about chickens since we can't even get them to care about whales? So I guess in answer to your question, Kim, my answer would be I hate the word pride, but pride. I'm proud of the fact that I did what I believed I wanted to do. And unfortunately, what I wanted to do was a good thing. Not everything I've always wanted to do is a good thing. But in this case, it was the best thing I ever did. I have always been very, very grateful to myself that I started United Poultry Concerns and that I didn't let anything or anyone prevent me from doing what I'm doing up to this very moment. Not at all.
Okay, now here's a fun question. I'm giving you a magic wand. You can wave it and you can make 3 wishes, whatever the hell you want. What will they be?
Get 3 of them.
Okay. I would wish that our species would be totally transformed into a truly caring species. that would be caring translated into behavior that respected other species, members of our own species, and the planet we live on. I mean, this sounds like cliches, but I want a vegan world. I want a world where we're not constantly creating a blanket of misery all over the earth, which is what we're doing now. We can't even encompass the misery that is being endured because of our species and because of our habits and our attitudes and so forth. So I pray, if not as a religious person, but pray. There's no comparable word for pray for people who aren't religious, but so I'll say pray, quotation marks. For a world where we are not eating animals, we are not torturing them in laboratories, we are not using them in our entertainments, we are not treating them like trash and like mere extensions of our desires, whatever they may be, which usually always involve suffering and misery and degradation. So I would wish for a vegan world in the sense of a world in which we really are responsible, caring, intelligent, good citizens of the earth. That's what I would wish for.
If that's really, you're only using up one wish, and if that's the wish, that pretty much covers it all.
Yeah.
Really,
That will be the halfway abolition. Yeah.
It's not a single issue campaign.
It's
not a single issue.
But that's the ultimate single issue.
Okay, so we've both been around a long time. We've been doing the animal rights work. Well, we have here, let's face it, we have. So what do you think are the primary accomplishments of the animal rights movement as it has evolved over the past several decades?
Okay, the major accomplishments. Well, first of all, I think the fact that there is an animal movement, that again might seem rather still peripheral within mainstream society, but is definitely a presence and definitely a force in our society. When I became involved in the movement, the farmed animals were hardly paid any attention to at all. That's a big thing. Henry Spira, the great Brooklyn-based social justice activist, he was one of my true mentors. He was the one who started Purdue as Pinocchio, the long nose, that he ran full-page ads in the New York Times and everywhere showing, Purdue's a liar with a big, long Pinocchio nose. He would constantly remind us that 95% of resources being expended in the animal protection movement is being devoted to 5% of exploited animals, whereas the 95% of exploited animals are farmed animals. And yet we're only devoting 5% or less of our total resources to educating the public about farmed animals and trying to do something to help them. In those days, the large organizations, all the stockholders and the administrators and everybody else, they ate animals. And they did not want to stop, and that's still an issue in some places within our movement. But certainly the fact that animals and animal rights and animal dignity and even animal personhood has become a term now. Animals are persons. Again, these ideas are filtering into our mainstream society slowly, but the fact is there was a time when they did not exist. And I have seen in my lifetime as an animal rights advocate a movement develop, starting in really the early 1980s particularly, but even a little bit before that, and then to see a farmed animal movement grow out of that. Finally, what Henry Spira was demanding, that we devote our 95% of our resources. Well, maybe we haven't totally reached that, but look at the attention that chickens are getting now from large organizations. Look at the extent to which these undercover investigations are focused upon chicken plants, turkey slaughter plants and hatcheries, pig farming, and now increasingly too these phony so-called humane humane alternatives, which are just themselves factory farming. We're going to hear a little bit more about that today from our direct action, what is it? Everywhere, thank you. Who's going to speak today about that. So the point is that I think that, as everybody says, we have such a long way to go. No question about that. We know that. But we've come a long way. And so the third component, I would say, first of all, it's just that there's an animal advocacy movement, which is a formed, organized component of our society. Secondly, that within that formed, organized component of our society, farmed animals have become so important. And now, you can find vegan food everywhere. Even down on the eastern shore of Virginia, where we're located, which is dominated by the poultry industry and which is in a rural area, you can go into the main supermarket, Food Lion, where we're located, and you find all these vegan foods. Veganism is no longer a word that people don't know. So the vegan foods, now you see foods that are marked vegan. We've reached the point where our movement and our eating desires are being attended to by marketers, by companies. So that's huge.
Well, and also, we have the Republic of Vegan, all vegan store on University Avenue in Berkeley. So it's less than a mile from here. It opens at 7 o'clock tonight. That's the commercial. You should all go there. And I think to add to that, also, Karen, we have all these professional associations. So we have Animal Legal Defense Fund.
Yes.
We have PCRM, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. So we really have a variety of professional associations just focusing on animal rights. It's huge.
Yes, absolutely. So yes, I've seen huge things happen since I got involved in the movement in 1974. And I just have to say this quickly. I was a juvenile probation officer in Baltimore in the early 70s for 5 years. I started getting literature unsolicited from the New Brunswick SPCA, Brian Davies group, about the slaughter of the harp seals in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And I didn't even know, I barely knew what a seal was. But when I ate eggs, I didn't even think of a chicken back in the early days. Growing up, I never made those connections. I'm ashamed to say, but I didn't. So, the slaughter of the seals, suddenly I'm getting all this literature. One thing that led to was I joined a tour in March of 1974 under Brian Davies' leadership to go to see the seals in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. I thought we were going into a seal-protected area onto the ice floes where the babies were just being born with their mothers. And what I saw there was that the landsmen up there just beat the baby seals to death just to do it. It was just something they just do up there. And I was so traumatized by the whole experience that for 10 years, I basically stayed away from anything that had to do with animal issues. I felt like I didn't have the capacity to bear that experience and maintain any kind of sanity. So
That leads me to a question. When I was driving down here with Becky Markle, who I work with at Animal Place, and I said, okay, I'm going to be asking Karen some questions. Becky, what would you want to ask Karen? And one question she had is, do you experience compassion fatigue? And if so, what's your coping mechanism or mechanisms?
do I experience compassion fatigue? By that, do you mean, do I get really depressed and disgusted over how people are?
I think it manifests itself differently for different people.
The thing that saves me is getting up and going to work every day. That's really it, because when you go to work, when you feel so bad, because it's always with me. It's in your gut, the way, it's always with me. The sadness for the animals, the grief, the sorrow, the rage at the way humans treat them and how people are by and large, the whole thing. So it's always with me. It's just it's a condition. It's not just feelings, it's a condition that I live with. So it's really having to formulate your feelings into to craft an article or a campaign or a film or whatever it is you're doing for animals. It's both therapeutic for you because you have to switch gears mentally. Now you are focused on putting together a coherent object for public consumption on behalf of animals. So now you're engaged. Now you're engaged in choosing the right words, choosing the right images, making sure you've checked your facts and you're spelling everything right. And so you're engaged. You're not just living with your feelings. You're turning your feelings into productive activity. And I look forward to that every day of my life, that productive activity. So I would have to say that when I'm by myself and I'm at my computer and I'm reading some horrible new internet revelation about some vicious, ugly thing happening, I'm full of rage. I'm full of rage. I think you're psychopathic if you're not full of rage about these things. I really do. If you're not full of grief and sorrow and rage, as the Greek tragedians talked about, anger and fear deriving from the sources of evil, and pity and sorrow on behalf of the victims. Somehow we have to amalgamate those things into a force of activity that will sustain us and somehow be productive. That's what we have to do. So that's what I do. So in answer to your question, do I experience compassion fatigue? I would say no, because I'm not fatigued by compassion. I would be fatigued if I suddenly didn't. I would be happy. I was going to say I would be fatigued if I didn't have the work. If I stopped doing this work. Now I would not be fatigued if the reason I stopped doing this work was because you succeeded. That would be a whole new lease on life. But no. This is the work I do, and I look forward to getting up and doing it every day since this is the situation, and since I have chosen to be a person on behalf of these animals. See, I would never. Actually, Kim, I think, feels the same way too. When you are actually,
but I also go out and have a pig and that.
Okay, well, yeah, but see, when you have actual animals and you're looking in their faces, you see the chickens running up to you when you walk out the back door, and their little faces looking. You see, I could never abandon them. Never. That's one of the reasons why I think people have come to ethics from different perspectives. Some come from an abstract perspective, others maybe from the ground up. I feel like I sort of have both. But the thing is, when you really looked at somebody and you know that how much they're depending upon you, and you can't abandon them. You can't abandon them. I can't abandon the chickens in my sanctuary, and by extension, I can't abandon chickens. I can't abandon animals. And very quickly, I just want to say this because this is so important to my progress as an activist. After that 10 years of just feeling like I couldn't face animal abuse, the suffering that is inflicted deliberately on animals in all of these different ways that we do, it was when I saw a little item in the Washington City paper about World Laboratory Animals Day in Lafayette Park in Washington. And I said to my husband, I'd really like to go to this, but I'm really afraid because I'm scared of what I'm going to see there. And I said, okay, so we went, okay? And we walked across the grass, and I saw all these terrible posters and images and everything, but there were two in particular that just completely caught my attention. One was of a non-human primate who had been used in a head transplant experiment. And that's starting up again, by the way. That's another thing. These hydra heads, you knock them down and 10 more heads come up again. But anyway, the other one was of a beagle who was on like a wire grid thing in a cage who had been used in a burn experiment. And the whole side of this beagle's body was just raw, burned flesh. All this stuff's still going on all the time, But as I subsequently
wrote about this. It was looking at the face of that beagle and the face of that primate. The face that had an indescribable look on those faces. Something you could call, why did you do this to me? What have I done? It's just, it's so went into me. I said to myself right then and there, never again will I abandon animals to the iniquity of our species because I can't stand what they're going through. They are going through it, and I'm saying I don't have the courage to go through, in my mind, what they're going through. In fact, that's the moment I became an animal rights activist, and I never turned back. That was it.
No, that's well said. I mean, the suffering that any of us feel, because it's so painful knowing, but it doesn't even come close to what the animals go. So let me ask you the last question.
I'm going to wrap it up.
Yeah, this is my last question.
Okay.
So, you open up, what paper comes to your house? Or what paper do you read? New York Times? Let's get to New York Times. Let's go big. You open up the New York Times, and across the top, it says, all animal exploitation is done. We've solved it all. There's no non-human animal suffering. There's no human animal suffering. What do you do? How are you going to spend your time?
Now that I don't have anything to do anymore?
You don't have, there's no pauses. I mean, it's just, you got your first wish. You got this compassionate, loving, benevolent world.
I'm going to go out and tell my chicken. We're going to celebrate out in the chicken yard. And we're just going to keep celebrating. Well, I would, I'll just be happy.
That's good enough. That's good enough.
I will